"You are dead to us," my father wrote to me, not knowing that I had secretly supported her financially for years. I replied, "Okay." Then I put my phone on my desk with the display facing down and continued to work. It was a Thursday afternoon in February. Gray sky outside my office window. A half-empty cup of coffee, long since cold, was standing next to my keyboard. The office was running around me as usual. Keyboards were clicking, soft conversations, the steady hum of a printer somewhere along the corridor. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just 11 words that quietly ended 29 years. 72 hours later, I stopped every euro I had ever transferred to them. And 2 hours after that, my mother called screaming, "Before you decide what you think of me." And I understand. If your first impulse is to judge, you need to understand how it came about, because none of this happened overnight. There was not a single explosion, not a big moment when everything broke apart. It was slower than that, quieter. Such a development that happens in such small steps that you hardly notice it, until one day you step back and realize how far you have moved away from yourself. That's this story. I grew up in Stuttgart, middle child. My older brother Dominic, then me, then my younger sister Petra. My parents ran a small printing house for most of my childhood. Things went well for a while. It was enough for a stable life. Nothing extravagant, but reliable. And then at some point it didn't work anymore. But here is the most important thing about my family. When reality changed, they did not change. They kept the same apartment in the same district, the same habits, the same standard of living, the same expectations of what life had to look like, only without the income that all had made. They did not adapt. They did not shrink. They didn't sit down with us and say things have changed and we all have to adjust to it. They just shifted the weight, and without anyone ever saying it out loud, without a single conversation, without a direct request, this weight ended up with me. At the beginning it was small, a phone bill here, purchases there, 200 euros when it became scarce at the end of the month. It felt normal. It felt like what you do when you love your family and have a little more than them. But help has a habit of quietly becoming a structure, and structure eventually becomes an expectation. At the age of 26, I only transferred the 400 euro home every single month. Rental share of utilities. My mother's medication. She has a thyroid disorder, ongoing prescriptions, expenses that silently added up in the background, and then Petra's tuition fees. My parents had promised to take her over, and then without conversation, without recognition, they passed this promise on to me. It just popped up in my monthly issues one semester, as if it had always belonged to me. I wasn't rich. I want to say this clearly. I have budgeted carefully. I mostly cooked at home, lived modestly, refrained from doing things that I actually wanted, because the transfer was due at the end of the month and the numbers had to be right. I have consistently redirected a significant part of my salary to a family that had made me their financial basis without ever having decided it together. And here's the point I want you to think about for a moment. They never thanked each other. Not really. Not directly. Not in a way that had weight. There were comments. "Alia always comes through." Almost proudly said, mostly in front of relatives, as if it were a nice character trait and not a monthly sacrifice. But never to me. Never a real conversation. Never a moment when one of my parents looked at me and said, "We'll see what you're doing. And it means something to us." Have you ever carried something heavy for someone who hasn't looked down once to notice the weight? That's what those years felt like, every single month. Dominic lived at home, 31 years old, worked part-time in a hardware store. He did not contribute anything, but in the eyes of my parents, in the way every family meeting was organized, in the way every problem was brought to him first, in that quiet gravity that determined every Sunday evening, he was the center of attention, the reliable one. I remember exactly when my mother said that. We were all standing in the kitchen. A very ordinary evening, nothing special. She said it, by the way, as if it were a matter of course. Dominic is so reliable right in front of me. I transferred 400 euros first every month. He did not transfer anything. I did not object. I did not correct them. I didn't make a scene. I just registered it the way I register most things. Quietly, completely, and have put it in the part of my head by storing information that shows me the truth about people, especially if you don't even realize that you are revealing them right now. The control was never loud. This is exactly what makes them so difficult to describe and so difficult to leave. It did not come as a demand or an ultimatum. She came disguised as care, as love, as sensible, family advice. Which cities would be suitable for my career, whether my time for a move made sense for the family, who I dated, and whether the timing was right, always with this framework for the family. As if my life would be a part of their life and any deviation something that needed their approval. Every limit I set was interpreted as selfishness. Every step towards my own life was treated like a small act of abandonment. And yet on the first of every month, I opened my banking app and made the transfer. Then came Hamburg, a real opportunity, a better position, a team that I respected, 30% more salary, and a city that I wanted to go to for 2 years. Not loud, not dramatic, just something I kept coming back to when I was thinking about what my life should actually look like. This time, I didn't ask. I decided. I accepted the offer, and then I told them. Quiet in a Sunday conversation with no room for negotiation in my voice, because there was none in my head. This was not a suggestion. This was information. My father said I was selfish. I would give up my responsibility at a critical stage. He used the word responsibility quite consciously, charged with history, with meaning, with the clear message that my most important responsibility was to you. My mother was crying. Dominic wrote to me that evening. You are destroying the family. I read it, did not answer. Days later on this gray Thursday afternoon with cold coffee next to my keyboard and the usual office noises around me, my father's message came. You're dead to us. I stared at it, read it twice, felt something moving inside me that I wasn't quite prepared for. No anger, not the sharp pain I expected. Something calmer than both. Something that felt strange and undeniably for clarity, as if a frequency that I had only half perceived for years had finally fallen silent. I typed OK, sent it off, put my phone down with the display, and kept working. What I did after that was not impulsive. It is important to me that you understand this, because it is this part that makes the difference. I waited for hours, not out of insecurity, but out of discipline. I have slowly learned through enough mistakes that the distance between a reaction and a real decision is time. I wanted to be sure that what I was about to do came out of clarity. Not out of pain, not out of anger, not out of that hot impulse that arises when you have just been hurt. Decision. In these 3 days, I went through everything. Every bank transfer of the last 3 years, every standing order, every single payment that I had almost forgotten. The car repair, the broken heating on a cold November weekend, the dentist appointment that I had taken over because waiting for someone to ask had long felt pointless. When I put everything together, the total was a little over 48,000. I just sat there and looked at this figure. Not dramatically, just clearly.
48,000 euros.
Quietly, consistently, without fuss, without recognition to people who had just informed me in 11 words that I was dead to them. On the third day, I opened my bank account. I stopped the standing order, did not send a message, did not write an explanation. There was nothing more to explain. The silence lasted exactly 72 hours. Then my mother called. I was half unpacked in my new apartment in Hamburg, moving boxes stacked along a wall. Morning light fell through the windows overlooking a canal. It was quiet outside, in that special way that cities are quiet on week mornings. I had made myself coffee, was sitting at the kitchen table, my hands around the cup. When her name appeared on my display, I just looked at him for a moment. Then I answered it, because I had already decided that I would do it. I wasn't hiding. I was not afraid of the conversation. I just wanted to be ready for it. She screamed even before I could really say hello. The landlord had contacted me about an open payment. Petra's university had sent a reminder. An invoice had not been settled. The entire structure that I had been maintaining in the background for 3 years, invisibly every month without recognition, started to visibly fall apart after 2 hours. And somehow, the way these conversations always go, it was my fault. I was holding the phone and I was listening. I didn't interrupt her. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I just waited the way I learned to wait until she was done. When the screaming finally stopped, I said, "I know all this, Mom." She asked me what I would do now. "Nothing." I said, "No more." More screaming. And then Dominic's voice in the background, sharp, indignant, suddenly filled with urgency. The reliable one who suddenly discovered responsibility, now that there was no one left to effing the costs for him. I was waiting for a break in the noise. Then I said quietly, without anger, just as a fact. "Dad said, I'm dead to you." I took him seriously. "I think you should too." And I hung up. I put my phone on the windowsill and looked out at the canal. The water was shallow, gray, completely untouched. I wasn't crying. Not because I didn't feel anything. I felt everything. The loss. The strangeness of the moment. This quiet pull when a door closes, which one had long hoped might open in a different way. But I had already grieved. Not in these 72 hours. Not even in the weeks before. I think I had been silently grieving for years for the version of my family that I would have needed and resigned myself step by step to the fact that they would never be like that. When my father sent this message, most of this grief was already behind me. What was left felt clear. Have you ever grieved for something that is still alive, that still calls you, still says your name, but has already disappeared in every way that really matters? If you know what I mean, I'm sorry. I understand it better than I would like. After that, everything went quickly. Within 6 weeks, my mother found a part-time job, something she had claimed for years that she couldn't do. Dominic began to participate financially, regularly, seriously, probably for the first time in his adult life. Petra arranged her tuition fees herself, negotiated a payment plan with her university, competently, independently, as she would have been able to do all the time. Everything that supposedly needed me suddenly didn't need me anymore. Interesting how this works. And I want to be honest about something, because honesty is the only reason why it's even worth telling this here. It doesn't feel like a victory. There are moments, quiet, mostly in the early morning, when I feel the absence of my father. Very concrete, very real. Moments when I think about the man he used to be when I was little, before everything became calculated. Tired. Moments when I miss the idea of a family that maybe could have been different. But I have learned to distinguish two things that can feel very similar from the inside. Guilt says you caused this. Grief says you've lost something. What I feel is sadness. Clear, honest grief without being used by this constant, quiet background noise of it. This is something completely different. Today, on the 1st of every month, I make a transfer again. First, I put euros into a savings account that I opened the week I moved to Hamburg. And every time, really, every time, it felt like I was getting back something piece by piece that had always belonged to me. If someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally has ever told you that you are selfish because you choose your own life, then take a moment and think about it, really, because sometimes selfish is just the word that people use when you stop being useful to them. My father said I was dead to her, but the truth that he didn't understand at that moment is, that was the moment I started living. Monsieur.